I'm delighted to be here this morning and to share with you some news from inside the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, or the Commission as we call it. I'm going to talk for half an hour or just under, and I'm going to cover an update from the Commission, where we are in our evolution, details of the foundational building blocks that we're currently putting in place, and what our short-term goals are for 2015. Then I'd like to share with you some of my vision for the future of the organisation and the important features and characteristics that myself and the Chief Commissioner would like to put in place. I'd like to caveat, however, that I'm going to be somewhat limited in what I can share with you about the strategy of the Commission, as we are in such early days. In fact, the first milestone in the creation of our strategic plan is next month, when the Commission will present to the Oireachtas the first iteration of that plan in the form of a strategy statement and key priorities as set out by the Chief Commissioner. But I should be able to give you a sense at least of where we're setting course for, and some of the things that Emily and I would like to prioritise. So, we were established as a new organisation on November 1st last year, bringing together the former Equality Authority and the former Irish Human Rights Commission. The purpose of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission is to protect and to promote human rights in Ireland, and to build a culture of respect for human rights, equality, and intercultural understanding in Irish society. This wording comes from our legislation, which is the keystone of the organisation, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act of 2014. We all carry around dog-eared copies from meeting to meeting. It's my Bible at the moment, I have to say. And it's a very well-crafted piece of legislation that outlines our functions, our principles, and our powers. The Commission is made up of 15 individuals, I see one of them here today, Betty, who are appointed by the President and who are independent officers of the state. This group of 15, led by Chief Commissioner Emily Logan, is currently working on the first strategy of the organisation. I mentioned that first milestone of the strategic plan, and this is a milestone that is in fact articulated in the legislation, which declares that 6 months from establishment date, the Commission is obliged to present a strategy statement to the Oireachtas. The plan will then continue to take shape over the remainder of this year through public consultation with civil society, social partners and experts in the field of human rights and equality. And this first strategic plan will then run from 1st of January 2016 to the end of 2018. The 15 individuals are members of the Commission. They comprise 7 men, 7 women, and the only full-time member, the Chief Commissioner, who this time around happens to be a woman. Their terms are either 3 or 5 years, and there is a possibility of a second term for each member. Within this group of individuals, there is a great depth and breadth of talent. We have experts from both human rights and equality, solicitors, barristers, academics, activists, and a great balance of scholarship and practice. The Commission membership is diverse in its own makeup, although I think that's something that we can continue to improve on throughout the life of the organisation. They're a passionate group of people who take very seriously the role they have been charged with. It's my honour to attend the plenary sessions of the Commission, which happen every 6 weeks, and where the policy decisions of the organisation and the strategy and vision is set. In addition to the plenary commitment, the Commission members populate subcommittees of the Commission, which connect to the various teams of the staff and offer oversight and expertise. They also represent the Commission in various external fora, for example at the Management Board of the Fundamental Rights Agency and as liaison to individual state functions and agencies. And we're very proud that one Commission member, Siobhan Mullally, is currently under consideration for the position of Judge of the European Court of Human Rights. Our legislation sets in place a structure that affords us a new level of independence, not enjoyed by either of the former legacy bodies. And this independence is an important feature of any national human rights institution, as we need to be able to hold the state to account for its activities without the threat of resources being cut. This is in accordance with the Paris Principles, which govern the composition of national human rights institutions and which emphasise independence, accountability and pluralism. The legislation also guarantees our financial independence, where it states that our grant allocation will be reasonably sufficient for the purposes of expenditure by the Commission in the performance of its functions. And our setup means that there is no control of our budget by a parent department such as Justice. Instead, we report on financial activities directly to the Oireachtas. I'm the accounting officer for the organisation, a role held primarily by Secretary-Generals and government departments and a small number of state agencies. And this means that I'm answerable to the Public Accounts Committee, although I do hope I never have to make that appearance. As director of the organisation, I lead the team of what will eventually be 47 staff who carry out the work of the Commission. I was appointed through open competition, and I have to admit that this is the first role I've had that is written into the statute book. It's in section 20, you can check it out. We have 4 teams within the organisation, a structure we've only established in the last few months. Legal and information, policy and review, public engagement, and corporate services. Each of those teams has been charged this year with scoping out the remit of their work and putting in place strong processes and procedures that will help us to deliver efficiently on the mandate of the legislation and the strategic priorities as set out by the Commission. I've titled the theme of this year Startup, and I've encouraged my management team to think about 3 categories of work throughout the year: define, develop, and deliver. Define who we are, what we're doing and how. Develop processes and tools that will allow us to be our best. And deliver on the work that we choose to take on. With this theme of startup and what I hope is a fresh breath of leadership from the Chief Commissioner and myself, the staff have moved away from some of the merger and legacy issues that were there when I arrived and have now entered into a new, more positive phase of transition. That's not to say that everything's fixed. The 2 legacy bodies had both been through very tough times before Establishment Day. Years of uncertainty, changing leadership and vacant posts in key parts of the organisations, drastic cuts on resources and budgets, and difficulties in the merger process itself. But even through these difficult years, both organisations produced high-quality work and addressed important issues in Irish society. And the stalwarts that have stuck it out, although no doubt wounded from that process, have shown unwavering commitment to the work of a national human rights institution and a national equality body. Although much talent and expertise has been lost from both organisations, much remains and is critical in shaping this new Commission. I'm now going to go through the teams and describe what they each do and some of their goals for this year. Our legal and information team looks after 2 main areas: the public information service that we operate, providing information and responding to public queries on various equality and human rights issues and acts, and the legal powers that feature in our legislation, which can be broken down into the following areas: offering legal advice, providing legal assistance, inquiry powers, amicus curiae, equality reviews, and equality action plans. I'm going to just highlight a couple of these, starting with amicus curiae. This is a function whereby we're invited to act or can put ourselves forward as a friend of the court on cases that have a human rights and equality dimension. I'll mention 2 notable cases that we've recently provided amicus briefs for. One was ruled on just this week, and it was a case concerning the arrest of an alleged victim of human trafficking, which saw a very positive ruling in human rights terms, acknowledging that the state's administrative scheme for the protection of victims of human trafficking is inadequate under EU law aimed at combating trafficking in human beings. We also acted as amicus in the recent McDonnell versus the Governor of Wheatfield case, where the applicant's constitutional rights were breached as a result of being on 23-hour lockup for a period of 11 months. Again, we welcomed a very favourable ruling when the court stated that the solitary confinement of the applicant for 11 months, even though it was for his own safety, amounted to a clear and sustained violation of his constitutional right to bodily and psychological integrity. These 2 decisions are evidence that our role in providing amicus curiae has measurable impact, but we want to be smart about that impact. So part of the legal team's work this year will be assessing the efficacy of past amicus curiae and other legal functions. And this activity of reviewing and analysing prior work for effectiveness and impact will be a feature for all of the teams and is part of my goal as director to develop intelligent, strategic thinking about when it's best to use and to not use the various functions that we have. Our power of inquiry under section 35 of our legislation is probably our strongest legal power, and one which will be no doubt used sparingly. Both former bodies undertook types of inquiries, but without invoking the full legal strength of their powers, and the inquiry function, as outlined in our legislation, is a heightened function, with stronger powers of compellability for witnesses and documentation. National human rights institutions across the globe have used inquiry powers in very varied and very effective ways to demonstrate the capacity of a body such as ours to monitor the human rights activities of the state. To quote Gillian Triggs from the Australian Human Rights and Equality Commission, an inquiry should shine a light somewhere that the government does not want a light to be shone. Although this is a quasi-judicial power and currently sits in the legal part of the organisation, I would hope that and intend that if the Commission does choose to undertake an inquiry, that it could be done so in a way that engages the public effectively and can be used as a means for awareness raising and the greater promotion of equality and human rights. The information part of the Legal and Information team is about providing a service to the public, where they can find answers to queries and concerns about equality and human rights issues and their rights under various pieces of Irish legislation. Because there's been a couple of quiet years, we're not seeing a huge volume of queries at the moment, but we hope to run an awareness campaign over the summer to promote the channels that people can use to get to us. And ultimately, we plan to use the data gathered through our public information service to analyse trends, identify emerging issues, and inform the rest of the organisation about what topics are of concern to the general public. I come from the very data-driven environment of the tech sector, and I'm excited about how we can innovate in this space. Our policy and review team is a smaller group with two main areas to look after: to influence legislation and policy domestically, and to interact with monitoring and treaty bodies internationally. The primary items in their toolbox are legislative observations, which can be submitted throughout the legislative process, policy statements, which help us to draw attention to new issues or to train a different lens on existing ones, and reports to international bodies, which are big undertakings that allow us to influence the profile of the state at European or UN level. In recent pieces of work, this team have done a great job of bringing together the more concrete legislative structures of the equality sphere with the more vast international human rights frameworks, creating stronger contributions than the two former bodies. Recent contributions include our observations on the Children and Family Relationships Bill and the Garda Amendment Bill last year, and policy statements on access to civil marriage and on direct provision. The next big milestone for this team is our report to the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, which we'll be submitting at the beginning of May, and the subsequent state hearing, which we'll be attending in Geneva in June. We're also working to retain our A status accreditation post-merger. This is a process whereby the International Coordinating Committee of National Human Rights Institutions, such a mouthful, an Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, ranks bodies such as ours as either A or B status, according to our compliance with the Paris Principles. It's an important piece, not just because we all like getting A's, but because it impacts on our profile internationally, and most importantly, determines our level of access to the speaking rights at the UN Human Rights Council and processes like the Universal Periodic Review. This is where we get the opportunity to call the Irish state to account in an international forum on its human rights record. As with the other teams, the policy group will this year build up intelligence about the strength of their former contributions and when and how it's strategically appropriate to activate specific functions. For example, we already know that it's best to submit legislative observations at the beginning of the process, and that the international treaty and monitoring bodies like us to shape our reports as concluding observations. We also plan to be more proactive in our interaction with politicians. We're delighted to see the establishment of the Oireachtas Subcommittee on Human Rights Issues relative to justice and equality matters, and we plan to engage across the Dáil in helping elected representatives to better understand how they can shape legislation that is stronger in terms of human rights and equality. Public engagement is probably the team with the most defining to do. This will be a large team that brings together a number of functions: training, positive duty, research, awareness, and events. And rather than go through each of these, I'm going to focus primarily on positive duty, which I think many of you will be interested in, and then I'll also touch briefly on our research goals. So positive duty is enshrined in section 42 of our legislation, and it states that a public body shall, in the performance of its functions, have regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, to promote equality of opportunity and treatment of its staff and the persons to whom it provides services, and to protect the human rights of its members, staff, and the persons to whom it provides services. When we use the term positive duty, we're referring to the positive obligation for organisations to consider human rights and equality in their work. A negative duty is one such as a legal obligation, where a penalty is implemented for non-compliance. This is a more proactive approach. Including this wording in the legislation is a huge development in public sector reform that aims to stitch equality and human rights into the work of all public sector bodies. It's not intended to place undue burden, and this point was emphasised by the working group on the legislation, but it does emphasise the economic and social benefits to this approach. During the drafting of the legislation, the inclusion of positive duty was fought for by civil society groups, and it now offers real potential for many groups and individuals to advance equality and human rights, including, I suspect, many of you here today. By placing equality and human rights mainstreaming on a statutory footing, it has the potential to embed equality and human rights practices at an institutional level within public sector bodies to effect cultural change. This will ultimately mean that equality and human rights considerations become an integral part of what is planned and delivered. Public bodies will be required to assess in their strategic plan the equality and human rights issues relevant to their function, to set out the policies and plans in place or to be put in place to address these, and that goes again in their strategic plans, and to report on developments and their achievements in this regard in their annual reports. This will result in public bodies putting in place measurable targets on equality and human rights, and they will have to commit to support the development of organisational capacity to deliver on equality and human rights. Otherwise, we risk it evolving as a tick box exercise. With the functions of the Commission, we need to strike a balance of enabling change and eliminating abuses, and the positive duty in our legislation is a huge step in the first goal of enabling change. This year, we will be building and communicating an ambition for positive duty within the public sector. It's important that public bodies understand that the duty is on them, that the onus and responsibility for compliance rests with the public body itself. And within the context of the strategic plan, we will be engaging with public sector bodies and a wider group of stakeholders in defining exactly what positive duty will look like. And briefly, in terms of research, our goals will build on the strong track record of the Equality Authority in this space. We're currently undertaking an attitudinal survey to determine public awareness of and attitudes to human rights and equality. And this year, we'll also consider our longer term goals for research. We'll look at the impact and effectiveness of past research, and we'll be hoping to get more creative in the types of research that we engage in. One thing I'd be keen to explore is longitudinal research, which will inform our effectiveness as an organisation and the shifting landscape of human rights and equality issues within Ireland. And the final team is corporate services, which looks after the operations of the organisation, human resources, finance, audit. And their priorities for this year will include building good governance across the organisation, hiring a full complement of staff, moving to a new premises, and building a unified system of administration. An organisation like ours is under constant scrutiny, so getting this part of the operation right is critical. It's no good delivering strong policy, legal, or public engagement work if we can be undermined in our overall integrity. In terms of governance, it's about making sure that we're watertight and that we adhere to the appropriate ways of conducting our activities. The Commission were operating as a designate group for 20 months prior to my arrival and that of the Chief Commissioner. But now is the time to articulate clear procedures for how the legislative functions are brought to life and managed in a controlled and consistent way. Some of these are heavy legal powers, as I've mentioned, so this piece is important. We expose ourselves to judicial review if we don't handle these powers with great care. And in hiring, this year will be busy for us. We're currently at about 23 staff and have to reach 47 in total. Applications have just closed a couple of weeks ago for a batch of roles in our legal team, and next up will be roles in the public engagement and policy and review teams. I'm excited to bring new people into the organisation, and I hope to draw talent from across the public sector, the NGO sector, and further afield. And the new office, the new IT systems, goal setting, record keeping, HR, all come under corporate services and are all very much at starting point. So this is a busy phase for this team as we shape the culture, values, processes and practices of the organisation. So that's the 4 teams. At an organisation-wide level, my goal is to have in place by the end of this year a full team that are in a state of readiness and happiness to carry out the first strategic plan of the Commission. Since I started this job 6 months ago, it'll be 6 months on Monday, and apparently after 6 months it takes ministerial approval to fire me, so yay. I've been very focused on building the team, both in terms of physical numbers, but also in terms of morale. My background in the corporate sector has equipped me with the management skills I need to get people excited about a shared vision. To achieve this, I am improving communications across the staff with regular staff meetings and better interaction at each level of management, setting in place a system of goal setting which helps people at all levels to understand the direction of the organisation and where they fit into it. And I've invited in a number of experts to come and share with the staff their perspective on the establishment of the Commission. Deglán O'Brien, a senior civil servant in the Department of Justice, who was the chief architect of our legislation. Judy Walsh, head of School of Social Justice, who specialises in how human rights and equality fit together in concept and in practice. Sarah Spencer and Colm O'Caneja, two UK-based academics who have done a huge amount of research and consultation in the establishment and performance of institutions such as ours, and the merger of national human rights institutions and national equality bodies. Colm and Sarah had some very positive things to say about the circumstances of our merger. Although all such mergers happen within very different political and national contexts, ours is notably strong in terms of the legislative basis, the resources with which we've been furnished. I have a 6.3 million budget this year, besides my staff allocation of 47, and our independence. We are the 6th country in Europe to undergo such a merger of human rights and equality bodies within the state, and we hope to capture that experience effectively to help with transparency, with reporting and sharing best practice with future mergers in other jurisdictions. I have to say I was surprised when I started in the job at how low the mood was amongst the staff, but I think things are really changing and people are getting excited about being part of what I hope is the biggest and most effective human rights and equality body in the history of the Irish state. Which brings me to the end of my section on where we're at, and I'd like to now cover a little bit about where we're going. For the title of this talk, I borrowed from the guiding principles of our legislation, section 10.3, which states that the Commission shall exercise its functions under this Act with a view to encouraging and supporting the development of a society in which there is respect for and protection of each person's human rights. There is respect for the dignity and worth of each person. A person's ability to achieve his or her potential is not limited by prejudice, discrimination, neglect, or prohibited conduct. Each person has a fair and equal opportunity to participate in the economic, political, social, and cultural life of the state, and there is mutual respect between persons, including classes of persons, based on a shared understanding of the value of diversity within society, and on a shared respect for equality and human rights. I keep going back to this text when I think about what we should strive to achieve as an organisation. What it says to me is that we need to make rights real for Irish people. We need to make sure that those who are most in need of exercising their rights are aware of them and have adequate means to assert them. That those who are most frequently and most acutely subjected to discrimination are able to articulate their experiences and seek an appropriate response. To do this, we need to make sure that above all, we are an accessible organisation. For example, when we produce a document through our legal or policy work, we need to make our findings available to a wider audience in other less formal ways. We need to make sure that we are contactable and that we have a strong brand and an identifiable presence. In our new premises, we will have a public space where we will be able to invite people and groups in to engage with us. And civil society is critical for us here, in connecting us with those who most need to engage with us, bringing issues and audiences to our attention and championing the rights of those who they represent. I'd also like to explore how technology can help us to engage more effectively with ongoing research and public engagement. We have a referenda once every few years, but with such a large portion of the population now online, we can strive to get more regular pulse updates on pertinent issues in Irish society. If we were to break into this space, we could help to stimulate democratic participation in the population and to amplify the voice of the people of Ireland. The other term that jumps out at me throughout our legislation is intercultural understanding. This is an exciting area for us to move into, where we can bring together all of our functions with a goal of changing hearts and minds in Ireland. My own perspective is that it's early enough in Ireland's journey to still get this right. I understand that there are many challenges, but we can look to other jurisdictions and learn from the mistakes they have made in their approaches to better intercultural understanding, and we can strive to get it right here. We want to establish ourselves as the authority on human rights and equality in Ireland. And we want to operate in a space where only we can, bringing added value and complementing the work of other regulatory agencies, civil society and other social partners. I'd also like to make sure that as the manager of 47 staff, I make this an enjoyable journey for my team. We need to be authentic and enshrine the values that we espouse to others, creating a work environment that is participative and fun. And finally for me, there is one major goal that I will hold dear as long as I remain in this role, and that is sustainability. As I've mentioned, the two legacy bodies that we bring together have excellent track records in performance, but both were subjected to cuts that made it difficult for them to carry out their work. I want to get us to a point where it would be unthinkable that there would be an Ireland without a Human Rights and Equality Commission. The role we have will not become obsolete. There will always be a need for a body to hold the state to account. So we need to stitch ourselves deep into the fabric of Irish society and ensure that we remain a permanent feature of the state's infrastructure. Thank you very much.